The sun was dying over the western sky, bleeding its last gold into the desert dust. When she appeared, thin as a shadow, proud as a hawk. The woman's name was Nayeli, an Apache widow who carried her little girl in her arms and hunger in her eyes. The wind tugged at the ends of her tattered shawl as she walked down the lone dirt road toward the town of Clearwater Creek, a place where cowboys spat tobacco into the dust and prayed no ghosts followed them from the plains. The sound of her steps was soft, but it carried the weight of every night she had gone without food, every promise she'd whispered to her child beneath a cold sky. When she reached the saloon, its piano was out of tune and the laughter inside too loud to belong to good men. She hesitated, clutching her daughter close, knowing the kind of stories whispered about Apache women who came begging, but desperation had no pride left to protect. She pushed open the swinging doors and every head turned, some with pity, some with cruel curiosity. Behind the bar stood Elias Ward, a tall cowboy with a face carved by years of dust and sun, a man who'd sworn never to let anyone close again after the war took his brother. He looked up from polishing a glass and met her gaze, and for a moment time stilled. Something about her eyes, dark, fierce, unbroken, cut through the silence that lived in his chest. She stepped forward, voice trembling, saying, "Please, hire me for one night. My daughter is starving." The words dropped, heavy in the room like a prayer. No one dared answer. Men shifted, some snickered, but Elias saw the truth in her voice. She wasn't selling herself. She was selling her last shred of dignity for her child's life. He set the glass down, walked out from behind the counter, and said quietly, "Ma'am, you don't need to work for that meal." But she lifted her chin, pride still burning in the ruins of her spirit. "No," she said, "I must earn it." And that single sentence lodged itself in his heart like a bullet he never meant to take. Elias gave her a small task, sweeping the porch, cleaning tables, and fed her and the little girl afterward. He learned her husband had died fighting for land the government later claimed, that her tribe scattered, and that she had walked nearly 50 miles through the wasteland just to find a place where her child could sleep without fear. The way she held her daughter reminded him of his mother after the war, holding what little hope remained. That night, when the moon climbed above the saloon's roof, Nayeli sat by the fire outside, feeding her child bits of cornbread. Elias stood by the doorway watching, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. The wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying the faint sound of an old lullaby in her tongue. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the ache. She turned and caught him staring. For a second, neither looked away. It was as if the whole desert had gone silent just to watch two broken souls notice each other. Elias offered her a blanket and a corner of the barn to sleep in. She refused at first, still guarded, but the child was already nodding off. When she finally accepted, he led them through the moonlight. The horses stirred as they entered, snorting softly, sensing the gentleness of the woman who brushed their manes before lying down in the hay. Elias lingered at the door, guilt mixing with tenderness. He didn't know why he felt responsible, but something in him whispered that if he turned her away, he'd lose the last piece of decency he still had. So he stayed outside a while, watching the stars blink over the mesa, wondering what kind of world forced beauty and strength to beg in the dust. He thought he heard her cry once in the dark, and his chest tightened, but he didn't move. Some grief he knew had to breathe alone. The next morning, when the sun cracked over the horizon, Elias brought them breakfast, fresh eggs, biscuits, and a jug of milk. The little girl smiled for the first time, and Nayeli's eyes softened. She thanked him in a low voice, and he caught a flicker of something fragile between them. Trust, maybe, or the beginning of it. The townsfolk gossiped, of course. Clearwater Creek had a long memory and a short tolerance for anything that didn't fit its rules. "That cowboy's gone soft for an Indian widow," they whispered. But Elias didn't care. He gave her small chores, paid her fare, and every day found new excuses to talk with her. She told him about the mountains where she grew up, the rivers that once ran clear, the stories her husband used to tell around campfires. And slowly, without realizing, Elias began to laugh again, low, genuine, like the sound of rain on dry land. Days turned into weeks. Nayeli learned to ride one of the gentler horses, her daughter playing nearby in the dust. The ranch came alive with a warmth Elias hadn't felt since before the war. Yet he also saw the danger, rumors spreading, prejudice sharpening. One afternoon, a group of ranchers rode up, faces hard. "You think you can save every stray that walks into town?" One sneered. Elias's hand drifted near his revolver, but he didn't draw. Nayeli stood behind him, silent but unafraid, and something in her calm made the men falter. When they rode off, Elias turned to her, saying, "You shouldn't have to face this." She looked him straight in the eye. "All my life I've faced worse," she said, "but you make me forget to be afraid." The words hit him deeper than any bullet ever could. That night, as the sky bruised purple over the plains, he sat beside her by the fire again, the silence between them full of everything they couldn't yet say. The girl slept in her mother's lap. Nayeli looked up at him, her face lit by the flames, and for the first time, he saw her not as a stranger in need, but as the woman who had brought his heart back from the dead. The firelight painted their faces in gold and shadow, two lonely souls finding warmth in a place that had long forgotten mercy. The desert wind carried the smell of rain from far away, though rain rarely came to Clearwater Creek. Elias sat quiet, hands folded over his knees, eyes tracing the flames as they danced like restless spirits. "Back in the war," he said after a while, his voice low, "I learned that hunger ain't the worst pain. It's living afterward and not knowing what for." Nayeli said nothing, but he felt her eyes on him, steady, listening, understanding. "My husband," she said softly, "wasn't killed by a bullet. He was killed by promises. The white men said if he worked the railroad, we'd get land and safety. When he died, they took even the grave from me." Her words cracked, something open inside Elias. They sat that way for a long time, saying little, letting silence do the talking. The child stirred, murmured in her sleep, and Nayeli brushed her hair with such gentleness that Elias forgot how to breathe for a moment. As the days slipped by, the rhythm of their lives intertwined. Nayeli helped with the horses, her hands sure and patient, the way only someone who had lost everything could be. She sang softly while she worked, old Apache songs about rivers and spirits. Elias pretended not to listen, but every note sank into him like sunlight through cold glass. The little girl, Taya, grew stronger, chasing chickens across the yard, laughing freely now. The ranch began to feel like home again, though neither dared to call it that aloud. Then came the storm. It rolled in from the mountains one evening, black and angry, shaking the ground with thunder. The wind tore through the barn, spooking the horses. Elias ran out, shouting over the noise, trying to calm them. Nayeli followed without hesitation, holding Taya close in one arm, using the other to close the gates. Lightning split the sky, blinding white, and one of the horses reared, snapping the fence. Elias barely had time to shove Nayeli aside before the animal bolted. They fell into the mud, breathless, the rain pounding around them. She looked up at him, eyes wide, face inches from his, and in that flash of lightning, the whole world narrowed to just them, two hearts beating too fast to belong to strangers. Elias started to speak, but stopped himself. Instead, he reached out and brushed a strand of wet hair from her face. She trembled, not from fear, but from something deeper that neither dared to name. When the storm passed, they found shelter inside, soaked and shivering. Taya slept wrapped in a blanket by the hearth. Elias brought a cup of coffee to Nayeli, their fingers brushing as he handed it over. "You could leave," he said quietly. "There's a town east of here that takes in families. Safer than this place." She looked into the fire. "And what about you?" He hesitated. "I ain't much for company." She smiled faintly, that tired kind of smile that hides 1,000 heartbreaks. "Maybe you just forgot how to have it." The next few days, Clearwater Creek buzzed with whispers. Someone saw them together in the storm. Someone else claimed the widow had cursed the ranch. Prejudice spread like tumbleweed in the wind. One afternoon, Elias found a dead crow nailed to his barn door, a warning. He tore it down without a word, but his jaw tightened, and Nayeli saw the battle in his eyes. That night, when the wind blew cold, she came to him by the porch. "You risk too much for me," she said. "They already hate my kind." Elias leaned against the railing, the lamplight catching the scar across his cheek. "They don't scare me," he said. "But losing you, that might." For a moment neither spoke. The desert stretched silent before them, the moon rising like a silver coin over the hills. Then softly she said, "You can't lose what was never yours." And but the way her voice trembled betrayed her heart. By the time the harvest came, something had changed between them. Elias caught himself waiting for her laughter, For her songs drifting through the morning air, she found comfort in his steadiness, the way he never treated her like a burden. One evening, he carved a small wooden horse and gave it to Taya. The girl squealed with joy, hugging his leg, and Niley's eyes filled with quiet tears. "You've given her more kindness than this world ever did," she whispered. "Kindness," Elias said, "is just love without courage." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time, he reached out and took her hand. No words, just that single, trembling connection between two people who'd been alone too long. That night the stars were clear and countless. The widow and the cowboy sat side by the dying fire, the desert air cool around them, hearts too loud to ignore, and though neither confessed it yet, both knew the truth. The loneliness that had once chained them was slowly turning into something else, something dangerous and tender. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain again, and somewhere in the darkness a coyote howled. Elias turned to her and said softly, "You and that little one, you're safe here, as long as I've got breath." Niley didn't answer, but she leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in years he felt whole. The night ended not with words, but with a promise, the kind the heart makes in silence. The fire went out, but warmth lingered between them, glowing brighter than the dawn that waited beyond the hills.